The miraculous change in Saifuddin saw the beginning of a number of strange things that came to pass in the village that year. There was not the slightest doubt in anyone's mind, even Mahjub's, as they saw miracle after miracle occurring, that it was all attributable to Hanin's having said to those 8 men in front of Saeed's shop that night, "God bless you all. May God bring you his blessing." The time was a little before the evening prayer, a time especially propitious for prayers, especially when made by such saints of God as Hanin. The village was still and silent except for a slight fresh breeze that played with the fronds of the palm trees. The 8 men who were witnesses, and the rest of the people in their houses and fields, they all remember that night as clearly as though it were yesterday. The thick, velvety darkness lay over every corner of the village, except for the faint beams of light leaking out from the windows of the houses and the bright light from the large lamp in Saeed's shop. The time was that of the seasonal changeover from summer to autumn. Saeed the shopkeeper remembers that the night had not been scorchingly hot like its predecessor, and that his face was not moist with sweat as he weighed out sugar for Saifuddin, and that when the hulabalu occurred, as he put it, he left his scales and went out of his shop to intervene between Zain and Saifuddin. He remembers a cold breeze blowing on his face. The people who did not have the good fortune to be present at the incident, because they were preparing for evening prayers in the mosque, mentioned that as he led them in prayer that night, the Imam recited a section of the chapter of Mary. Hajj Ibrahim, Zain's uncle and Ni'ma's father, a man renowned for his truthfulness, states quite definitely that the Imam read the verse, "And shake towards thee the trunk of the palm tree, it will drop upon thee fresh dates fit together. From the chapter of Mary, a verse which is particularly auspicious and blessed one. Hamad Wadrayas, who is well known in the village for the range of his imagination and a propensity for exaggeration, adds that on the night in question, a comet appeared on the western horizon over the burial grounds. However, no one except him mentions a comet. In any event, there is no doubt about Hanin, that righteous man, saying within the hearing of 8 men on that auspicious night between summer and autumn, just a little before the evening prayer, "God bless you all. May God bring you his blessing." And it was as though supernatural powers in the heavens had answered in one voice, "Ameen." After that, supernatural events came in quick succession, miracle following miracle in a fascinating manner. During its existence, the village had never experienced such an auspicious and fruitful year as Hanin's year, as they had begun to call it. It was certainly true that the prices of cotton had had an unprecedented rise that year, and that the government, for the first time in history, had permitted them to cultivate it, whereas previously it had been restricted to specified districts of the country. Mahjub alone, and on his own admission, made more than £1,000 from his cotton. It is true, too, that for no particular reason, or for some obscure one they didn't know about, a large army camp was set up in the desert 2 miles from the village. Soldiers eat and drink, and so the village benefited from supplying vegetables, meat, fruit, and milk to the army. Even the prices of dates had an unprecedented rise that year. Also true is the fact that the government, that creature which in their anecdotes they likened to a refractory donkey, decided all at once, again for no apparent reason, to build in their village, to the exclusion of the rest of the village of the northern sector of the country, a large hospital for 500 patients, a secondary school, and an agricultural school. All this despite the fact that they were people without power or influence and with no spokesman to talk on their behalf in the assemblies of the powers that be. Here again the village benefited through supplying the labor, the building materials, and the food, to say nothing of the fact that the sick among them were assured of treatment and that their sons would obtain proper education. If all these indications do not suffice, how do you explain that the government, that refractory donkey, as they believed, also decided that very same year, no more than 2 months having passed on Hanin's death, to organize their lands into a large agricultural project which the government itself, with all its power and authority, would supervise? Suddenly, they found their village alive with land surveyors, engineers, and inspectors. When the government has made up its mind to something, it has the power to carry it out, and it was merely a question of day following upon day and month succeeding month before there rose up on the bank of the Nile by their village a lofty, temple like building of red brick which cast its shadow upon the river. A little later, amidst the din of laborers and the grating of iron, the wheels of the giant began to turn, and its pumps began sucking up such quantities of water from the Nile as 10 water wheels, during tens of days, would not have managed, all in a flash, like a man sucking up his tea. And so the vast tract of land from the bank of the Nile to the edge of the desert was inundated with water. Some of it was land that had not seen water from early times, and there it was, after a while, swelling with life. How could this be explained? Abdul Hafiz, though, knows the secret. Scanning this expanse of field which is his, as the wind plays with the wheat so that its ranks bend down like graceful houris drying their hair in the breeze, he says to Mahjub, "A miracle, my friend, without the slightest doubt." Turayf sat down furtively in his chair after having told the headmaster of the news of Zain's marriage. He seated himself on the edge of his behind as though preparing himself for flight at any instant. There was something of the hyena about his manner and his nature. Looking around him with cunning eyes, he whispered in the ear of his right-hand neighbor, We've got out of tonight's geography. I bet you the headmaster won't finish the lesson." As predicted by Turayf, the headmaster announced in a listless, offhand voice that he was going out on an urgent matter. "Revise the lesson on the wheat growing area of Canada." And he went out with constrained steps as watched by Turayfi. He attempted not to hurry until he got to the door of the school courtyard. Turayfi gave a mischievous laugh when he saw the headmaster grasp the end of his abba and rush forward through the sand as hard as he could go. The headmaster reached Sheikh Ali's shop in the market, panting for breath and dry of throat, the school not being all that near to the market, and the two being separated by a tract of sand into which one's feet sank. Besides, the headmaster was in his 50s. Sheikh Ali's shop in the market was his favorite haunt. He was also delighted to see Abdul Samad, with whom he had a bitter-sweet relationship, and without whose presence he could never really enjoy any gathering or game of backgammon. Though still 10 yards away from the shop, he couldn't help starting to speak. "Sheikh Ali, Hajj Abdul Samad, this year's a year of miracles. What a thing to happen." The last sentence brought him to them, and they sat him down in his favorite seat, a low wood and cord armchair. The coffee was still hot and gave off an aroma of canela, bark, cardamom, and ginger. Taking hold of the cup, he brought it to his mouth, then quickly replaced it. "Is the news true?" he said. "Drink up your coffee before it gets cold," Abdul Samad said with a laugh to the headmaster. "What they say is quite right." Shifting the quid of tobacco from the right side of his mouth to the left, Sheikh Ali said, "The story of Zain's marriage? It's 100% true, all right." The headmaster took a large gulp from his cup of coffee, placed it on the small table in front of him, and lit himself a cigarette and took a deep pull. "My dear fellow, this is a most strange year, or am I wrong?" The headmaster did not use the expression chap or man like the other villagers, but would begin his sentences by using the phrase, "My dear fellow." "What you say is quite right, headmaster," said Abdul Samad. "A really extraordinary year. Women who'd given up hope of ever being pregnant suddenly have children. Cows and sheep give birth to two or three. Hajj Ali continued to enumerate the miracles that had taken place that year. The dates from the palm trees were so plentiful we couldn't find enough sacks to carry them in. Also, it snowed. Can you imagine such a thing? Snow falling from the sky on a desert town like this? The headmaster shook his head and Abdul Samad muttered incoherent words, for the fall of snow that year had been something to amaze them all. And the headmaster, for all his vast knowledge of geography, could find no explanation for it. But the biggest miracle of all, said the headmaster, is the business of Zain's betrothal. He had the habit of interpursing his speech with words in the classical language. One is loath to believe it, said Sheikh Ali, who was like Abdul Samad, infected by the headmaster's classical words, and they would both try to vie with him. Haneen's words were not idle ones, said Abdul Samad. He said to him, tomorrow you'll be marrying the best girl in the village. Yes, by God, that's so, said the headmaster. The best girl in the whole village. What beauty, what manners, what modesty. What money, said Abdul Samad provocatively. I know you had your eye on her because of her father's wealth. I? Have some shame, my dear fellow, said the headmaster, furiously warding off the accusation. She's no older than my daughters. What have your daughter's ages got to do with it, old chap? Said Sheikh Ali, seeking to placate him. A man's a man, whatever his age, and a girl of 14's ready for marriage to any man, even if he is in his 60s, like your honor. Have some shame, dear fellow. I am in my 50s. I'm certainly younger than both you and Abdul Samad. Abdul Samad exploded into his famous guffaw that came from deep inside his chest. Well, let's forget about the question of age, he said. What do you think about the story of Zain's marriage? That's a fantastic business, said the headmaster. How is it Hajj Ibrahim accepts it? Zain's a dervish of a man who shouldn't be married at all. You should, sir, be careful when talking of Zain, said Abdul Samad with profound conviction. He is a man blessed of God and was a friend of that devout man Haneen. God rest his soul. May God rest his soul, Sheikh Ali added. He brought prosperity to our village. And it was all because of Zain, said Abdul Samad. My dear fellow, we weren't talking about miracles even so, though. When everything's said and done, Sheikh Ali interrupted him, a man's a man and a woman's a woman. And in any case, the girl is his cousin, added Abdul Samad. The headmaster kept silent, for he could find no answer to their words, at least from the point of view of formalities. The fact that a girl was reserved for marriage to her cousin was an irrefutable argument according to the convictions of village folk. It was an ancient tradition with them, as ancient as the instinct for life itself, the instinct of survival and the preservation of the species. Yet in the depths of his being he felt, as had Amna, that a personal affront had been directed against him. For an instant he experienced a pleasant sense of relief that neither Sheikh Ali nor Abdul Samad knew he had talked to Hajj Ibrahim about Ni'mah. Otherwise he would have been unable to escape from their biting sarcasm. Drinking his 5th cup of Sheikh Ali's coffee, he asked himself why it was he had asked for her hand, a girl as young as his daughters. He did not know exactly. He had seen her one day leaving her house wearing a white dress and had met up with her face to face. Captivated by her beauty, he had given his greeting in a trembling voice, and she had answered him with quiet composure. Your Ni'mah. Hajj Ibrahim's daughter? He had said to her. Yes, she said, neither hesitant nor timorous. Quickly, he searched around in his mind for some other question with which to delay her, but found nothing better than, Your brother Ahmed, how is he? This was her youngest brother, who was one of his pupils. Fine, she said to him, her bold face right in front of his, and went on her way. After that, the headmaster spent many nights with her image in his mind. Perhaps she awakened in his heart some hidden feeling he had not recalled for 20 years. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, he had seized the opportunity provided by a slight indisposition that befell her father to call and inquire about his health. By good fortune, he found him on his own. After a mundane conversation about the prices of wheat and the state of the school, the headmaster came right to the point and quickly asked for Ni'ma's hand from her father. At first, Hajj Ibrahim understood nothing, or perhaps pretended not to, and sought elucidation from the headmaster in 1 or 2 sentences, which cut into his very soul. You want Ni'ma for whom? He asked first of all. For whom? Said the headmaster with a certain haughtiness. For me, of course. It was as though Hajj Ibrahim had plunged in a dagger and then pressed down on its hilt the better to make it fast in his heart when he said to him, For you? The long and the short of it was that his visit had been a grave mistake. Hajj Ibrahim had endeavored to lighten the blow by making a long speech about the honor the headmaster had conferred upon him by his request, that he would have been the best of son-in-laws, and so on. But, and this was the important thing, the difference between his age and the girl's made it impossible for him to accept. If he had done so, he would not have been easy in his conscience, apart from which her brothers would have objected. Finally, the headmaster sought to repair the damage by exacting an oath from Hajj Ibrahim that he would say nothing of what had passed between them to a living soul, and would regard the matter as though it had never happened. Let's dig a hole and bury it there. Hajj Ibrahim did not fail him. Nevertheless, the headmaster, despite the fact that deep down he knew himself to be at fault, was unable to get rid of the bitter taste in his mouth. When he heard that she was to be given in marriage to Zein of all people, he felt the dagger plunging still deeper into his heart. He was slightly alarmed when he heard Abdul Samad say to him, Your honor shouldn't be in any way annoyed. If you want to marry, the village is full of women who are spinsters or divorced, or whose husbands have died. The most beautiful of women, I swear to you. At this, the headmaster really flared up. All his inner resentment was poured out on Abdul Samad. Fellow, are you mad? Don't you know the difference between being serious and joking? Haven't you got an atom of brain? What concerns me is the actual problem of the girl, how she can stand life with a dervish of a fellow who doesn't know black from white. And there you are talking about spinster women. You really are an oaf of a fellow. Abdul Samad guffawed with laughter, pleased at having succeeded in rousing the headmaster. He sought out such opportunities. Perhaps what had pained the headmaster had been the mention of widows and divorcees. Do you mean to say that His Honor the headmaster, when wanting to marry another wife in addition to the mother of his children, should marry a second-hand woman? Said Sheikh Ali, fanning the flames. Really, Hajj Abdul Samad, you are a proper oaf. Abdul Samad seized hold of the English word second-hand, which Sheikh Ali had employed, and proceeded to tease him about it. What's that you said, Sheikh Ali? Second-hand? And he pronounced the words as though they were Arabic. Wonders will never cease. Ali Wad Shayyab using foreign talk. The headmaster laughed exaggeratedly, doing his best to try and deflect the attack from his own person to that of Sheikh Ali. But Sheikh Ali, knowing all about Abdul Samad's stories and the headmaster's dodges, ignored Abdul Samad's attack and brought the conversation round again to the subject of Zain's marriage. The important thing is as we have said, is that getting married is no problem. A man's a man, even though he's drooling, while a woman's a woman, even if she's as beautiful as Shajar ad-Dur. The headmaster secretly wondered how it was that Sheikh Ali knew the name of Shajar ad-Dur, the former slave girl who ruled Egypt in the 13th century. Though ignorant of it, Abdul Samad found the name pleasant sounding. However, he was embarrassed to inquire lest he show his ignorance. Sheikh Ali set about enumerating to both of them the names of men of no consequence who had nevertheless married women of outstanding intelligence and beauty. He took possession of his adversary's attention for no little time and was filled with happiness at seeing the astonishment and admiration that showed upon their faces. He reminded them of the story of Kuthayr, with whom Azza fell in love despite his being short and ugly. Also the story of the Bedouin woman who, asked why she had married an ugly and uncouth man, said, "By God, had you but—" The headmaster and Abdul Samad almost fell on their backs with laughter when they heard what the Bedouin women had said. He then referred to Ibrahimab tribe, who were all descended from the loins of a dervish named Ibrahim Abu Jibba, and how he— But Abdul Samad, exasperated by Sheikh Ali's being so long-winded, interrupted him with somewhat brusquely with, "Why go so far as Kuthayr, Azza, and Ibrahimab tribe when you've got Sa'id the idiot? Don't you know the story of his marriage?" The headmaster smiled, for he had a special affection for Sa'id the idiot. Or was it perhaps because he used to exploit Sa'id in getting him to bring kindling and water to his house? Sa'id used to sell firewood and to work in people's houses, and would hand over the money he earned to the headmaster to save for him. When he had wanted to marry, he had gone to the headmaster to ask his advice, after which he used to say proudly that the headmaster had, despite his lofty position, acted as a witness to his marriage contract. Everyone in the village knows the story of Sa'id's marriage and how he lived with his wife for nearly a year without touching her, till the woman, despairing of him, was about to divorce him. When asked about the reason for his dilatoriness, Sa'id would say, "There is no reason to rush into this business." He had, however, in later years had children, male and female, from her. Suddenly, in the headmaster's mind's eye there appeared the face of Ni'mah, and once again he felt the dagger stirring in his heart, as though he had not heard all the stories Sheikh Ali and Hajj Abdul Samad had told him. He said, "But will she marry Zain? That doesn't make sense, my dear fellow. By God, what extraordinary things do happen.